For 22 years, my parents called me the burden while my sister was their golden child. Then Dad raised a toast and said, "We only have one daughter we're proud of." My sister laughed. Until everything changed. For 22 years, I was labeled the burden while my sister shone as the golden child. At our family reunion, my father raised his glass and declared we only had one daughter he was truly proud of. That night, I decided to show them what a burden could really do. My father's toast lingered in the air, his glass still held high. The string lights crisscrossing Uncle Arthur's backyard cast a soft, party-like glow over everything. Fold-out tables were laden with food, 60 relatives mingled in their summer attire, and a projector screen, used earlier for a family photo slideshow, stood ready. Aunt Beatrice's tiered cake, a 4-hour journey for her, sat temptingly on the dessert table, framed by my grandmother's fragrant roses along the fence. My father's voice, confident and resonating, had carried across the entire yard. "We may have 2 daughters by birth," he'd announced, "but we only have one daughter we're truly proud of." He'd then directed his gaze and his glass toward Serafina. "To Serafina, our golden girl." Serafina, in a pristine white jumpsuit, feigned modesty, her hand pressed to her mouth in a performance she'd perfected. She'd arrived 20 minutes after me, pulling up in a car my parents had helped finance. When she stepped out, people had actually applauded, not a planned ovation, but the spontaneous kind that greets a protagonist. I, on the other hand, had arrived in a navy dress, a clearance rack find from a department store. I'd quietly taken a seat beside my grandmother, who had squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm so glad you came, honey." Now, my father's glass remained aloft, 60 pairs of eyes fixed on Serafina, and none on me. A profound stillness settled within me. It wasn't the silence of pain, I knew that texture intimately from 2 decades of experience. This was different, cleaner. I rose from my chair, walked purposefully to the projector table, and plugged in my phone. "How interesting, Dad," I stated, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Since we're all being honest tonight, I brought something to share too." I pressed play. Let me explain, difficult, not just the word itself, but the internal reality of it. I've read enough about family dynamics, the damaging labels, and the assigned roles within systems that need you to be a certain way to function. I grasped the theory. What I want to share is what being difficult actually felt like, from the inside, for 22 years. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 34. I grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the older of 2 daughters. For my entire childhood, I was the one who needed managing. Not because I was wild, destructive, or genuinely hard to raise, but because I had the inconvenient habit of accurately observing things and occasionally speaking those observations aloud. In my family, this was branded as attitude, which evolved into difficult, which eventually became the dominant narrative about me, a story that enclosed me like a room. My parents, Maria and Richard Vance, are people best described as having always structured our family around Serafina's comfort. My mother is warm and capable, having spent 30 years as the kind of mother who shows up, just not always for both daughters with equal frequency. My father is a man who profoundly believes in the outward display of family values, without ever questioning if his specific values withstand scrutiny. They aren't monsters, it's crucial to state that plainly. They are simply people who made a daily, 22-year choice about which daughter deserved resources, eventually ceasing to examine that choice because doing so would have meant admitting what they were truly doing. Serafina is 29. She possesses a specific, cultivated beauty, the kind belonging to someone who has always had the luxury of time and money to nurture it, someone who has never worked 2 jobs or worn clearance rack dresses to family gatherings. She isn't unintelligent, she's something more precise than that. She's a person so thoroughly shielded from consequences that she has never developed an understanding that consequences exist. The abstract concept is there, but the felt knowledge of it has been disallowed, because each time a consequence should have landed, someone intervened to remove it. I worked 2 jobs all through college. My parents, meanwhile, paid Serafina's rent, car insurance, and credit card bills, not just through college, but for 3 years afterward. I stopped crying when my mother forgot my birthday, not because the hurt vanished, but because at a certain point, pain transforms from an event into information. The information it conveyed was clear: you are not the primary consideration here. I absorbed that information and adjusted my expectations accordingly. What I couldn't adjust, because I seemed constitutionally incapable of it, was my automatic urge to help when they called. Over 3 years, I wired $18,000. These amounts varied, from $400 for what they called an emergency utility shutoff to $6,200 for a supposed medical bill. Each request came with a specific narrative, a precise sense of urgency, and language, I now understand, expertly crafted to elicit the exact response they had trained me to provide. Asterisk, I need to prove I'm not the burden they say I am. I need to show them I'm responsible. I need to make them see me differently. Asterisk, they saw me exactly as they always had. The money, I discovered 2 months before the reunion, went elsewhere. I learned this standing outside my parents' back door, in the peculiar stillness of a woman who had come to return house keys, only to hear her sister's voice through the screen and make a decision she didn't fully grasp at the time. I had stopped by on a Thursday afternoon, which wasn't unusual. I had a key and was in the neighborhood. My mother had texted, asking if I still had the spare set from when I'd watered their plants the previous month. I approached from the back, as the gate was open, and heard Serafina. Before I could announce myself. Her voice had a distinct quality it gets when she's solving a problem: focused, purposeful, efficient, like someone skilled in logistics, especially when those logistics serve her own ends. You have to stop asking Eleanor for money directly. She's getting suspicious. I froze in the narrow gap beside the back fence, my hand already in my pocket, clutching my phone. I've often wondered why I pressed record instead of walking away or walking in. The honest answer, I believe, is that I had been suspicious for months, and this was the confirmation. And some part of me knew that without documentation, this confirmation wouldn't stand a chance against the weight of the story my family had told about me for 22 years. I pressed record. I remained outside for 11 minutes. I have listened to those 11 minutes more times than I can count. The first time, I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for 37 minutes before I could drive. I wasn't crying, just sitting with the specific physical weight of something enormous that had been suspended in the air for 22 years, and had finally, definitively landed. What the recording contained, Serafina's voice, then my mother's, then my father's, I will tell you. Because the telling is the point, and because I played it for 60 people in a backyard in Nashville, and they heard every word. So there is no version of this where the words remain private. Serafina outlined the system. She had been telling my parents for years that I was selfish and unstable, using those words precisely and deliberately so they wouldn't feel guilty extracting money from me. She had been monitoring my finances, she said. She'd seen my bank statement when I left my laptop open at Christmas. She knew my savings balance. She had communicated it to my parents as a resource. She has savings, Mom. She can afford it. My mother's voice responded, she already paid the hospital bill. That should be enough. Enough, Maria. Serafina's tone was dismissive. She has more. We just have to ask, right? The medical bills I had wired money for, sent without hesitation in the specific way of a person who has spent 22 years trying to prove she isn't the burden they say she is, weren't all medical. Serafina stated it plainly. Some funds had gone toward her apartment deposit, a designer handbag, car repairs after she crashed while texting, a detail she hadn't disclosed to my parents because the real cause was inconvenient. I listened to this in my car, engine off. Then came the part one have thought about every day since, the part one could barely breathe through the first time, but have since learned to replay with the specific detachment of someone who has processed something and filed it away. Eleanor always tries so hard. My father's voice, imbued with something I recognized with full comprehension as affection, not malice, but the comfortable affection of someone describing a reliable resource. She'll pay if we make her feel like she owes us. She does owe us, my mother interjected. We raised her, didn't we? A pause. Then Serafina, with the specific amusement of someone delivering a perfectly timed line. Barely. You raised me, Eleanor raised herself. I heard a sound in the recording that took me 3 listens to identify, my own breathing from outside the fence. Steady and controlled. I didn't realize then that I was deliberately keeping it that way. I think it was instinct, the way you become still when you understand that the thing you are witnessing demands a witness, not an interruption. I drove home. I transferred the recording to my secure drive, creating a dedicated file. Then I called my therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed has been my therapist for 4 years, a licensed psychologist specializing in family systems and financial abuse. She was the first professional I told about the $18,000. Not because I hadn't recognized the dynamic, but because I had been telling myself a story about it that was more comfortable than the accurate one. The comfortable story was, my family takes from me because they're struggling and I'm capable. The accurate story was the one on the recording. I played her the recording during our session the week I found it. She listened to all 11 minutes. When it ended, she was quiet for a moment. How are you feeling? She asked. Clear, I replied. That's the thing. I feel very clear. What do you want to do with it? I had been pondering this for 5 days since that afternoon in the driveway. I need documentation, I said. The transfers, the messages, everything they asked for, everything I sent, every excuse. Why documentation? I glanced at the philodendron by her window, slowly outgrowing its pot, just as it had been for the 2 years I'd known it. Because without it, I explained, the story is just my word against theirs, and they have 22 years of calling me the difficult one, the unstable one, the burden. I paused. I want the record to be complete. And then I'm going to decide what to do with a complete record. She nodded. Okay, she said. One more question. The reunion. Your grandmother asked you to come, yes? Are you going? I thought of my grandmother, the specific warmth in her voice when she called, the genuine pleasure of hearing from me, the way she said, honey, in a manner that had always made me feel, in the compressed space of a single word, like I was the version of myself that had always existed, rather than the version my family needed me to be. Yes, I said. She looked at me steadily. Bring the documentation. I spent 3 weeks meticulously building the file, not frantically, but carefully. The way you build something that needs to endure. Every wire transfer pulled from my bank records, dated and documented. The text messages where each emergency had been presented. The specific language of each request, calibrated to produce guilt and urgency. The follow-up messages after each payment, which felt like receipts, brief, warm, immediately moving to the next subject. I called my cousin Daniel, 6 years my senior, who had observed our family from a distance just far enough to see it clearly. I told him what I had discovered, not all of it, not the recording yet, but enough. Eleanor, he said, I've known for years something was wrong. I just didn't know how to say it to you. Why not? I asked. Because you seemed like you knew, he replied. And because they're your parents, and I didn't think it was my place. If something like this comes out at the reunion, I told him, I'd like you to be there. A pause. I'll be there, he said. And I'll stay. I called my Aunt Clara, my father's sister, a woman I had always trusted in the specific way of someone who tells the truth in a family that prefers comfortable versions of it. I told her I needed her at the reunion, and that something might happen. Does it have to do with the money? She asked immediately. I remained silent. I've seen the pattern for years, she continued. I didn't know the specifics, but I know your parents, Eleanor. I know which daughter they truly see. There will be documentation, I said. Then I'll be there, she responded. And I'll bring Kleenex for myself because I'm going to cry, and I already know it. The file was complete by the Friday before the reunion, every transfer, every message, the recording saved in 3 separate locations on 2 separate devices, and a timeline printed on 3 pages. I had prepared it all because I wanted to be precise, and because precision had always been what separated me from the distorted version of myself they had decided I was. I packed the navy dress from the department store. I drove to Nashville. Uncle Arthur's backyard was everything a family reunion should be. String lights, the good kind, warm white, strung between fence posts and house eaves in glowing loops that made everything look slightly golden. 60 relatives arranged around folding tables, laden with the particular combination of store-bought and homemade dishes that family gatherings always produce. My grandmother's roses along the back fence. The projector screen set up for the photo slideshow. I arrived at 4:30. I sat beside my grandmother. I ate dinner and spoke with cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years. I watched Serafina bask in the ambient attention of a room that had always gravitated toward her, the way rooms do when someone has spent their entire life learning to occupy the center of them. I observed my parents. At one point, my mother passed behind my chair to reach the dessert table. She briefly touched my shoulder. Glad you could make it, she said, with the warmth of someone who was glad, but not surprised. Because my grandmother had told her I was coming. And because my parents always want me present, I now fully understand, because my absence would demand an explanation. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. My phone was in my dress pocket. The file was in my Notes app, with a link to the cloud backup. The recording was saved locally and in 3 cloud locations. I was wearing earrings my grandmother had given me for my 30th birthday, and a dress that cost $34.99. I'd eaten 2 servings of Aunt Beatrice's potato salad because it was excellent. I had driven 4 hours, and I wasn't going to waste it. My father tapped his glass at 7:15 p.m. I know the exact time because I glanced at my phone when I heard the sound, the specific instinct of someone who understands that timestamps matter. He stood near the projector screen, his glass raised, his face set in the expression of a man about to deliver something he considers significant, and wanting everyone to recognize its importance. He uttered the words he'd practiced. We may have 2 daughters by birth, but we only have one daughter we're truly proud of. He raised his glass toward Serafina. To Serafina, our golden girl. The yard fell quiet, the way spaces do when 60 people simultaneously ponder if what they just heard was truly what they thought they heard. Serafina pressed her hand to her mouth. I heard her soft laugh from behind it, the particular laugh of someone given exactly what they expected, finding the confirmation immensely satisfying. Something within me became utterly still. Not anger, not grief, not even the familiar, low-frequency ache of an old wound reopened. Something cleaner than any of those. The specific calm of a person who has carried something for a very long time and has finally arrived at the place where she will set it down. I stood up. 60 heads turned. I walked to the projector table. I unplugged the photo slideshow cable. I plugged in my phone. That's interesting, Dad, I stated. The backyard was absolutely silent. Since we're all being honest tonight, I brought something to share too. I pressed play. Serafina's voice filled the backyard at 7:17 p.m. You have to stop asking Eleanor for money directly. She's getting suspicious. I watched my mother's face. She turned the color of the tablecloth, not pale, not red, but something in between. A peculiar shade belonging to someone whose system has just received information that their rehearsed responses are completely uncalibrated for. She already paid the hospital bill. That should be enough. Enough, Maria. She has savings. I saw her bank statement when she left her laptop open at Christmas. 60 people didn't make a sound. I watched them do what people do when they are hearing something that demands a fundamental revision of their understanding. The small physical adjustments, the shifts in posture, faces moving through stages of reception. Aunt Clara's hand was clamped over her mouth. Cousin Daniel stood very still, arms crossed, watching my father with the expression of a man who has harbored a suspicion for years and is now witnessing it become undeniable evidence. The recording continued, detailing the medical bills, then the apartment deposit, the handbag, the car. Each item landed with the specific weight of a thing that was real, documented, and beyond explanation. Just keep calling her the burden, Serafina's voice said. It works. She'll spend her whole life trying to prove she isn't. That was minute 7. That was when Serafina bolted. Her chair scraped backward across Uncle Arthur's patio stones with a sound that sliced through the recording. She stood, her face pale beneath her makeup, the particular pallor of someone whose performance has been abruptly stripped away, who stands in a room without the carefully constructed version of herself she had prepared. Turn it off, she cried, her voice stripped of its confident register, smaller than the one on the recording. I didn't turn it off. She moved toward the driveway. Uncle Arthur, who had been standing near the gate with a glass of lemonade he'd stopped drinking around minute 3, stepped into the gap without drama. He didn't quite block her, just made his presence known in the doorway. My father moved toward the projector. Daniel stepped between him and the table, not aggressively, but with the quiet determination of someone occupying a necessary space. Let it play, my grandmother said. Her voice was quiet, yet it possessed a structural quality, the kind of quiet that causes a room to reorient itself because the person producing it has earned that authority over a long lifetime. My father stopped. The recording played its final section. My mother asking if they should even invite me to the reunion. We need her there, my father had said. People will think we're cruel if she doesn't come. Then, humiliate her a little. Serafina's voice, she'll leave early, and I'll still get my moment. I unplugged my phone. The backyard was utterly silent. For anyone wondering, I announced, I sent my parents $18,000 over 3 years. I have copies of every transfer, every message, and every excuse. My father found his voice, the specific tone he uses when he has decided to be the authoritative presence in a situation. You had no right to record a private conversation. Uncle Arthur answered before I could. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man who rarely speaks in crowds, and when he does, his words carry the weight of careful consideration. And you, Richard, Uncle Arthur said, looking at my father, had no right to use your daughter as an ATM while calling her a burden in front of the entire family. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. The yard remained perfectly still. The string lights continued their warm, golden glow, indifferent to the specific human accounting unfolding beneath them. My grandmother stood up. She is 81 years old, and she stood with the certainty of very certain people, without urgency, without drama, just upright. She walked across the yard to where I was standing. She took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply stood beside me, in front of 60 relatives, my hand in hers. The specific weight of that, the simple physical fact of one person choosing to stand beside another in a room watching both of them, was the only thing that happened in the next 30 seconds. And it was enough. I want to tell you about the aftermath, because that is where the real story lives, and because I think it matters. My father, after 37 minutes of the kind of silence that family gatherings rarely contain, tried to address the crowd. He claimed it had been taken out of context. He argued that recordings could be edited. He insisted I had always found a way to make things about myself. My cousin Daniel simply said, "Richard, stop." Just that. And my father stopped. I don't know if he stopped because Daniel said it, or because the particular quality of 60 people looking at you with full comprehension is not an audience a performance can recover from. But he stopped. Serafina was no longer in the backyard. She had left in the car my parents had helped finance, which was not a metaphor I intended, but one difficult not to notice. She sent me a text at 9:23 p.m., "You destroyed our family." I read the text, added it to the file with a timestamp, then put my phone away. Aunt Clara found me at the dessert table 20 minutes after the recording ended. She took a piece of cake and stood beside me. We ate cake together for a while without speaking. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "For what?" I asked. "For not saying something sooner." She looked at the slice of cake in her hand. I knew something was wrong. The way they talked about you when you weren't there. I should have said something. "You're saying it now," I responded. She looked at me. She had been crying at some point, not recently, but the evidence was still there. "You came in that dress," she observed, "that clearance rack dress, and sat down beside your grandmother, and you had that recording in your pocket the whole time." "I did," I confirmed. "How long have you known that they took the money?" "A few months." "That they called you a burden and meant it?" I thought about it for a moment. "I just needed the documentation." She was quiet. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I took a bite of cake, Aunt Beatrice's cake, which was absolutely worth the 4-hour drive. "I'm going to finish this cake," I said. "Then I'm going to say goodbye to Grandma. Then I'm going to drive home." "And your parents?" I thought about 22 years of the word difficult, how it had functioned not as a description but as a management tool, a way of preemptively discrediting anything I might say or notice. I thought about $18,000. About the recording, time-stamped, in 3 cloud locations. "They know where I am," I said. 3 months later, I am in my apartment in Chattanooga. It's a Saturday morning in September, and the light has that specific quality September light possesses, cooler and more honest than August. I am drinking coffee I made myself in a kitchen that is mine. I have not spoken to my parents since the reunion. Not because I've made a formal decision, but because there has been nothing to say that the documentation has not already said. And because I have learned, through 4 years of therapy and 1 evening in a Nashville backyard, that explanations offered to people who have already decided not to understand are not explanations. They are just more of your time. Serafina called me twice. Both times I let it go to voicemail. The voicemails described my behavior at the reunion as unhinged and calculated, which are, I note, both true, though Serafina used them as derogatory terms, and I find them accurate descriptions of what the situation required. My grandmother calls on Sunday evenings.